Newcastle United have made further moves in the transfer market this week as they've now bid for Joao Pedro, James Trafford and Anthony Elanga. In this video I'm going to be reacting to that, seeing where they go from here, and stay tuned to the end of the video for analysis of another possible target. Let's get into it. Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're enjoying the videos, I'm certainly enjoying making them. Please hit subscribe and like, crucially, on this video. It really does help grow the channel. Looking to get to 1,500 subscribers very soon. Yesterday I recorded something a little bit different where I thought up basically a couple of potential targets and discussed why Newcastle may benefit from looking at that particular market with my sporting director's hat on, complaining that there was very little to talk about. And as soon as I put it out, it broke that Newcastle had bid further for Joao Pedro and James Trafford on top of the Anthony Elanga bid that we discussed earlier this week. After being pod bombed and maybe a day late, but we are going to be touching on that, but also pushing it forward a bit, looking at where Newcastle might have to go next, what happens after this, and also crucially a bit of an interesting detail that emerged, particularly from Luke Edwards' report in the Telegraph yesterday. So yeah, 125, 120 million varying, depending on varying reports of the bids. We know it was 45 million for Elanga, so roughly around 50 million for Joao Pedro, and also probably I think 25 initially for James Trafford. My initial thoughts on each of these three players, by the way, is I think Newcastle will get James Trafford. I think if you followed my videos over the last few weeks, I think you'll have got that sense from me. They didn't really push for Juan Garcia before he went to Barcelona, even though there was heavy links. Haven't really made a move on Lucas Chevalier, even though he's available for a similar price and got Champions League experience. Newcastle are looking at James Trafford with the expectation that he replaces Jordan Pickford as England's number one, and they're looking to get him for a decent deal now. 40 million is what Burnley apparently asked for. I was always told that the deal might be around 30, possibly a little bit more, but Newcastle's bid looks like it's around 25 million. This one feels like it's going to get done. It's just a case of when. Fabrizio Romano's reported on that as well, on top of Luke Edwards and Martin Hardy as well in the Times. So this has a feel that it's going to happen. All three of these targets have really split opinion in the comment section below. I think Trafford is the most sensible because he is sort of earmarked as the future England number one. He's got high potential on his head. He's had a great season in the Championship last year with Burnley, which has really shown his credentials. Crucially, the difference is the ability to play out from the back, which is really the difference between him and Nick Pope at the moment. As I said after the Everton game at the end of last season, the massive difference between Pope at one end and Jordan Pickford at the other wasn't the ability as a goalkeeper, because Pope has been remarkable for Newcastle at times. It was more the ability with the ball at his feet, the nerves that the crowd feels when Nick Pope's got the ball, the nerves that he then clearly feels as well, and the defenders don't fully trust him as well. I think that's where Newcastle need to go a step further. And actually, what's something that's quite interesting about the sort of debate around Nick Pope is when there was a question about him and Martin Dubravka last season, Dubravka sort of was getting a lot of votes on the fact that he could play the ball out from the back better, but he's not particularly strong with the ball at his feet. That's not one of his main core strengths. He's just better at it than Pope, which shows you really how poor Pope can be with the ball at his feet. So I think that's why Newcastle are looking at a goalkeeper. Having said that, I think, and I've previously said this, that other positions are more important. However, Newcastle are going where the market takes them, and they're getting further with Trafford than they are with Joao Pedro, than they are with Elanga at the moment, but also other potential targets as well that we've discussed at length. I am going to be touching on a potential other target as well, because there were a couple of other reports linking Newcastle with other alternatives, and the really crucial thing is, before we get into anything, is that Newcastle, according to Luke Edwards, have a soft deadline of next week to make a breakthrough at least one of these deals before they move on. I think that mainly revolves around Joao Pedro and Anthony Elanga, but I would imagine that James Trafford will arrive, as I've said a couple of weeks ago from the very start on these videos, and Anthony Elanga I'm a little bit more sceptical of, because Forest don't want to sell, but there are reports of a 60 million fee, so could they be brought down on that? Could there be a compromise? Joao Pedro, we obviously know that Brighton do want to sell, and it's just a case of getting closer on that valuation. They've already come down from £70 million. I think they're around 60 at the moment, similarly to Elanga. Can Newcastle, I think they value him around 50. Is that too much of a difference? Let me know in the comment section what you think and what you want to happen. I know it's sort of split between the Premier League and European markets, and lots of people do like Joao Pedro and Elanga, but my message, and I think I've gained a lot of support, I've noticed in the comments section, about my thoughts on looking at other markets. And the thing that's really coming out again is that Newcastle are getting frustrated by the lack of movement with these and the lack of progress. This is what the reality is of shopping in domestic markets, and Newcastle have to be prepared to pay high amounts of money. Is £125 million right for those three players? I'd probably say it is roughly, in terms of individual values, that's what I would probably look at. 45 for the two players, give or take 5 million, and then around 30 to 35 for James Trafford. It's probably about right. But, you know, if Newcastle have that amount of money to spend on top of giving Alexander Isak a new contract, as I've sort of talked about and written about this summer, Newcastle can go and get better, you know, higher ceiling players for about that money, or even less in Europe, and that's my big problem. But my gut feeling is, do I think that they'll make a breakthrough? I think they'll absolutely get James Trafford. That's just my belief in terms of what I've heard and what I've been told and what I'm putting together, having watched this from afar. Anthony Elanga is the one I'm less convinced about, and I know that they really do like him as well, and he's been a long-term target, but Nottingham Forest are in a strong position, similarly to Newcastle with Isak, 3 years in his contract. They're in Europe, they're looking to build. He is central to that, and if they don't move away from £60 million, then there could be a Mark Gahey situation. Brighton are sort of in the middle because they are keen to sell Joao Pedro. I think the end of last season was a bit of a murky situation. I think Fabian Herzler would like to reinvest that money. They have got strong options in attack in Matoma, Minter, Ruter. Danny Welbeck does really well for them as well. And then if you reinvest that Joao Pedro money into somebody else, and they've already bought the young lad from Greece, who's extremely highly rated for about 40 million, then it makes sense. So I think that there will be a deal done there. It's just whether it's a deal on Newcastle's terms and whether it'll cost more than £50 million. And personally, I think that he is not worth much more than that. But if they're going to go to that, then that makes, you know, a lot of sense. The other question to ask here is what happens with the centre-back target if these three deals do happen at around 120 to 130 million pounds. There is no suggestion that Newcastle can't afford a centre-back as well. We've discussed figures of around 150 million pounds pre-sales at times this summer as to what Newcastle could spend, but that would probably max out their PSR situation, so there may be some sales to come in before a centre-back, and that does worry me a little bit because I think a centre-back is absolutely paramount before a goalkeeper, certainly. I know James Trafford is the specific target, that's why this is happening in the order it is. I think Newcastle cannot afford to go into the next season without a really powerful centre-back. Other than Botman, who's had serious knee injuries over the last year, all the other centre-backs are over 30. I think Sven Botman needs a top quality partner, so that's a concern. And there was news yesterday that Malik Thiaw, who was a former target, Newcastle haven't really made a move for him this summer, has joined Como, or is set to join Como for about £30 million. But again, profile-wise, he was ideal, but the number of games he was playing for Milan over the last couple of years, 20-25 a season, didn't really convince Newcastle in the end. Newcastle could go and get Gahey for around 30, 35, 40, potentially on top of that. I think that's an excellent summer. If they could go and get Scalvini, who would cost more, that's the truth of it. I think on top of that, that's the difficult thing. If these three deals happen without sales, I think a centre-back is difficult anyway. Even with sales, Scalvini might be a tough one to do. So let me know in the comment section whether you think Newcastle should go in for these three players at this price. It's pretty clear that they are the first choice. Next week is when they're going to move on to potentially Yohan Bakayoko, Karim Adeyemi. So yeah, there's other options, and Luke Edwards also crucially said that Newcastle were open to bidding for both. They want both. That's the ideal scenario in terms of Joao Pedro and Anthony Elanga, but they are sort of willing to go for one and then move on to a different target for the other. Crucially, though, there are more targets on the Elanga side of things, on the right-hand side, than there are Joao Pedro, even though Elanga is probably a higher target at the moment, because obviously Newcastle nearly did sign Joao Pedro before they signed Isak, but Anthony Elanga, I think, has been earmarked as the ideal player, whether I agree with it or not. And personally, as I say, I have misgivings about the fact that he's more right-footed. I do appreciate people have said in the comment section that he is both-footed, and I get that fully, and that maybe comes into the sort of versatility argument that we've discussed as well. So there's obvious logic for going for these players. Whether they'll get all three, there seems to be getting a little bit frustrated. I think that they'll definitely make a breakthrough on James Trafford, though. That's my thought, by the end of next week. And also, Joao Pedro is probably next in line. Anthony Elanga is the one where I think a few things hinge on, but also that's the one where I'm probably the least fussed about, because there are plenty of other options. You know, we've discussed Joao Bakayoko at £17 million. If that deal is on the table, that would be an excellent deal, and that would go in to free up some money for a centre-back, and then Newcastle have their 4 players, and I think they'll probably be done for deals, even though they may look at some squad depth as well. I think they do need squad depth. I've spoken about the fact that they probably need 6 or 7 players this summer, but the reality is that they're looking for 4 players, and they've set their stall out this week with those bids. It's ambitious, but it's not quite there yet. So I kept you in suspense with one potential target to be discussed, alternative target I should say. That player is Antonio Nusa from RB Leipzig. He's a player that Newcastle liked for a long time. They were interested in him when he was at Club Brugge in Belgium. He's extremely talented, 20 years old, right-footed, mainly a left winger, which is maybe why I think this one's a little bit of a doubt. Spurs have been interested. Brentford nearly signed him. So he's been in Germany for 1 season, 25 games, 3 goals, 3 assists in the Bundesliga, 8 appearances in the Champions League, no goals or no assists. So he's very, very raw. I think that's the crucial difference between him and all the other players we've discussed. But again, talking about his underlying stats, 85th percentile for expected assists. There's a lot of green lines here in terms of his end product, with non-penalty goals, 77%, 76th percentile for assists, shots total, 78, 75 for shot creating actions. But really, I think he comes into his own with the progressive carries, 98%, progressive take-ons, 99%, touches, 93rd%, and progressive passes, 97%. So he's very, very raw. I think that's the thing you've got to take from Antonio Nusa. Does he answer the questions right now? I'm not sure he does, partly because he's on the wrong side, but also I don't think he's quite ready to take the mantle on for one of those positions. So I don't think Newcastle will be looking at him in serious detail as a potential option compared to Xavi Simons and Joao Bakayoko, Adeyemi, Kudus, and all those players who we've also looked at before. Let me know what you think in the comment section below about what I've said around Joao Pedro, Anthony Elanga and James Trafford. It basically goes Trafford 1, Joao Pedro 2, Anthony Elanga 3. But that isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world, because they've got plenty of options, particularly at right wing, that they've looked at mainly. They don't have a lot of other striker options on their list. But on the right hand side, they do have a vast amount of options. So I wouldn't be surprised if Joao Pedro and James Trafford were the first 2 in, and then they maybe looked to move on elsewhere from Elanga if they don't make a breakthrough. Let me know in the comment section below if you think that that's the right thing to do. Like, share and subscribe, and I'll be back on Monday for another week of the NUFC Transfer Show. Cheers.